Bear.
Today we'll be discussing the serial killer Yin Yang in the TV drama series Psych. We'll be starting with Season 3, Episode 16, An Evening with Mr. Yang. The show opens up with Sean Spencer and Gus at the lunch table, and Sean is being his usual witty self, flirting with the waitress. And the first thing we need to note about this episode is the tone that Sean takes as the episode progresses. Obviously, in all the prior episodes, we see Sean as this goofy, cracking jokes all the time, somehow ends up solving the murder kind of person. But this episode takes a very drastic turn when the serial killer Yin Yang returns. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a weird episode because you don't ever see this side of Sean very often, because his whole thing is he's aloof and that's what he does, and so Gus kind of takes over in this episode so Sean can get down to business and do a lot of what he's his psychicness he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I think this is an episode where where Gus really gets to shine, because he's normally not at the front of the episode. But in this, you see all the things that he's willing to do for his friend. And I think that's a really interesting take that most people might not have expected for a big season finale like that.
And especially for Gus's characters, that's just not who he is at all throughout the series.
I agree. Right, so Mr. Yang, which is evidently one side of the serial killer, ends up sending a note to the police department, and the police chief immediately calls in Sean and Gus to take a look at it. And at the briefing of the Yin Yang killer is where we see Sean really stutter in his usual witty self for the first time, because he doesn't really know how serious of a deal the serial killer is, so he's still cracking jokes, and then all of a sudden the chief pulls up a slide with a note on it that says, P.S. bring your psychic along. And again, Sean tries to be witty and be like, well, that could be anyone. And then she pulls up a slide of a photo of Sean. And that's when we really see him I'm being called out now by this very dangerous serial killer. And we see him sort of dip a little bit from that joking self to, this might be life or death.
Absolutely.
And we see that as the show progresses, and he's chasing the serial killer who's leaving all these clues and riddles for them to follow. And the MO of the serial killer is to get in the head of the police officers and the people that are trying to catch him. And so we start to see Sean almost break down a little bit. So Daniel, I think it's interesting that you bring up the point of Gus really shining, because once they found the second clue, which was at the lunch table where Gus and Sean were eating that earlier that morning, that's where the second clue was. Sean's kind of cracking jokes and still trying to be his usual witty self as he solves all these crimes, and as he has in the past. And Gus pulls him aside. He's like, Sean, why are you joking? Why are you being an ass? This girl's life is on the line. You need to be serious. And Sean, for the first time in the series, opens up this is how I need to operate. I can't let this killer get inside my head.
Yeah, I know. It's very strange, when this, because it takes him a while to, really understand, the severity of what is happening. And it's not, and, the rest of the detectives, they're pretty on it because they've dealt with, Yang, in years past. This is, Sean's, first big case with Yang. And, the scene when they're on the pier and he does it, listen to, the instructions, freaked me out, when I first watched it, the first time. And I don't know, it just, it's very much a Sean thing to do, but him taking so much responsibility into his own hands for, one of the first times, I think is kind of out of character for him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we haven't gotten to it yet in the plot, but I think the biggest shift comes when it hits home closest to him. Within the plot, there's a certain event where it becomes his life and as opposed to somebody else's. And I think that's where the biggest shift for him really is.
Yeah.
And again, that's where Gus has to do things that he's never done and keep the vibe positive while Sean is at his lowest point.
Right. The point that Daniel is talking about is after the pier scene where Sean takes that big risk throwing the phone in the water with this idea that he knows that Mr. Yang's not going to kill the girl because he loves the game too much. And then they go to the psych office, and Sean has a fake mental breakdown. It says that he's quitting, he's not going to finish off the case, and that's really to lead Detective Lassiter's and Jules away from his real plan, which was to chase a killer on his own time. But we see this breakdown, and then it comes back to bite him in the butt later on when they do find the girl. She's alive and well, but Yang was watching them the whole time. She saw that Sean had a breakdown and wanted to quit, and not realizing that it was a joke, left a clue for him, another riddle, at the scene of the crime where they found the girl tied up. And the clue read, "Sean no longer wants to play, stakes too low to make you stay." And she left his mom's purse there with a bunch of photos to let him know that he had his mom. So that's what Daniel was talking about when he said it hit a little close to home, because now we see that he's not just chasing this serial killer who has this innocent girl's life, on the line. Like, now he's trying to save his own mom's life, and for anyone that can be, detrimental to your mindset and be devastating. So that's when we really see Gus try to bring up the mood.
Yeah, he steps into his own a lot in this episode.
Right.
So, yeah, and then next is the drive-in scene, correct?
Yeah.
Or, yes.
So they follow the clues, and they end up finding Sean's mom strapped to a bomb in a blue sedan in a drive-in movie theater. And Mr. Yang ends up being a girl is sitting in the car right next to her, right next to the blue sedan where Sean's mom is tied up. And Sean just kind of, again, very out of character. Well, of course he's out of character because, now he's dealing with his mom's life on the line, goes over and talks to Mr. Yang, which again is actually a woman, and talks the trigger out of her hand and saves his mom. But it's really interesting to see how the Yin Yang serial killer affected Sean's mentality throughout the entire episode, and how he and Gus almost switch roles. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think after he got the bomb and was on the date, I think that was the first time he was ever faking his wittiness. I think throughout the show it just comes so naturally to him. But when he's on his date, there's some shock there still, which is, obviously after something like that. But I think it's clear that those events with Mr. Yang really did something to him that changed him as a person.
Yeah, 100%. And then especially because you see like him be more serious with Abigail at the end. Like he turns down Jules, who's like the love of his life, and because he like wants to commit to this what he's already started, which is again like out of character, which I think is just like the main theme throughout all of these the Yin Yang episodes, is that they really get into his head more than usual.
Absolutely.